The subcommittee will come to order, subcommittees, I should say. And this is a important and unique day. It is Human Rights Day, and both the Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, and Human Rights, and my distinguished colleague, Ileana Ross-Layton, and her subcommittee are combined today in chairing this hearing and raising the issues of human rights abuse in Egypt. Today's hearing examines the escalating human rights abuses in Egypt. It is fitting that we are holding this hearing today on International Human Rights Day, December 10th, because we are witnessing grievous violence and other abuses directed against religious and political minorities, particularly the Copts and other Christians, about which our government and the media has said far too little, which seems to be a pattern worldwide. I'd like to now ask our second panel to make their way to the witness table, beginning first with His Grace Bishop Angaelos, who is the General Bishop of the Coptic Orthodox Church in the United Kingdom, the ancient Church of Egypt, and the largest Christian denomination in the Middle East. Your Grace, please begin.
Chairman Smith, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm thankful to all the members who are here as well. I must thank you all for braving the weather and coming regardless of all the impediments that must have braved you. I'm also apologizing for this cold that I have, and I assure you it's not caused by your weather. It's definitely a British import, which I bring. I'm also very thankful for the witness that I've seen here, because far too often, people who walk these corridors, whether in this country or in other places, are accused of being self-interested, and they're accused of being following a personal agenda. What we've heard today is a presence and a witness for those who are in need of support and are in need of that fraternal relationship. And I somehow feel that in light of the last hearing, that my presence here is quite superfluous because of everything I've heard and the insight that you have. Mr. Chairman, I've also submitted testimony for the record.
Without objection, yours and that of all of our witnesses will be made a part of the record, and any extraneous materials you want to add.
Thank you. Christians, as everyone knows here, have been part of Egypt's history for 2,000 years, since the establishment by St. Mark. We are only a numeric minority. We do not consider ourselves a minority group as indigenous people of Egypt. And as was mentioned earlier, and as is absolutely right, the presence of the Christians in the Middle East, the birthplace of Christianity, is not only something we should encourage, but is actually of great importance, because it is a stabilizing factor in the culture of the Middle East and its identity. I don't only speak here as a Christian, because that would be very un-Christian of me. We speak as Christians for everyone, and our view of human rights is for a human rights perspective that covers everybody. This hearing was postponed for various reasons, and it's only providential that it happens today, on this day set aside to remember human rights internationally. And I think that is the core of this testimony and the core of what we'll be presenting today. The first attacks on minority groups in Egypt was not on Christians after the uprising, it was on Sufi shrines. We've seen Shiite Muslims killed in the streets. We've seen Baha'is treated unfairly. And so if we are looking at equality issues, we should be looking at equality across the board. During the last administration of former President Morsi, one indication was that in April of this year, the Coptic Orthodox Cathedral was attacked for the first time in known history, in the presence of police forces then looking on, while a few days earlier, the headquarters of the Freedom Justice Party was attacked and was actually quite substantially protected by the same police force. So it is this culture that we've seen in the past of an impunity that leads towards a lack of equality. There's a tendency of oversimplification as well, being either pro-military or pro-revolution. The presence of Christians is that we are Egyptians before anything else, and that we want a country that actually proposes a movement for all. I issued a statement in August of this year warning that if incitement continued in Rabaa al-Adawiyya, with the Muslim Brotherhood presence there would be widespread attacks on Christians in Christian places. I am not prophetic by any means, but unfortunately only a week later we saw the attacks on close to 100 churches and Christian institutions in Egypt. That needs a new pragmatic and intentional movement towards democracy. Not just majority rule, which we saw last time, but democracy that represents all. And the new constitution, hopefully, will take us through that. It will be presented for referendum. What we need to address at the moment are issues of illiteracy and poverty that make constituents vulnerable when they vote and when they are indoctrinated, when they're manipulated either financially or in terms of ideology, and of course religion becomes part of that. What we also need is foreign investment to bring people to actually be able to have a livelihood and support their families. I have seen a lot of stick and far too little carrot when speaking about Egypt, in that we are very clear on pointing out shortcomings, but this is a process that countries that have embraced democracy for centuries are still going through. And so there are steps forward. I have respectfully heard terminology of a military government, whereas this is perceived to be a civilian government. The word coup. We've also looked at the happenings of not only January 25, 2011, but June 30th of this year as an outcry of the Egyptian people, Christian, Muslim, secular, religious, man, woman, young, old, everyone in the streets. And so we are hopeful for a new Egypt as long as there is a pragmatic and proactive, intentional move towards equality. Cases like the Hijazi situation, where we are told there is freedom of religion, yet people cannot really freely choose their religion. We have vested interest in Egypt moving ahead. We have vested interest in Egypt for all Egyptians. We don't just speak as Christians, because that, as I said, would be un-Christian, but we speak as Egyptians who want as successful a nation as it always has been for millennia. I would, even as a Christian clergyman, love to stop speaking about Christians and Muslims and start speaking about the spirit that we had in January 25, 2011, where there were Egyptian flags flying in Tahrir Square, calling for an Egypt. Unfortunately, those intentions and that dynamism wasn't capitalized on sufficiently. There were personal agendas brought in, and there was a manipulation of that good spirit that then led us down a very, very dangerous path. Egypt has a second chance now, and that chance needs to be taken. If we see the same activities of the last presidency follow again, I don't know if we'll have a third chance. We speak as Christians with hope. We have faced persecution far greater than this. We are still there as the biggest Christian denomination in the Middle East, and as the last actual bastion of Christian presence in the Middle East. But above all, we stand as Christians for human rights for all and for equality, both of right but also of accountability before a law that respects every person and brings the best out in every person for a nation that embraces every person. Thank you.
Grace, Bishop Angaelos, thank you so much for your testimony and for your leadership. On the panel, we'll go through a few questions, and if you could take notes, we'll do it all at once, and then you answer those questions as you see fit. Bishop Angaelos, if I could just say, you mentioned the kidnapping of Coptic Christian girls, which is an issue that I chaired 3 hearings on, and Congresswoman, Chairwoman Ileana Ross-Layton was there at each of those hearings. We did not get good answers back from the administration. Matter of fact, they failed to raise those issues in any substantive way. Could you speak to that very briefly? And there are many other issues I'd like to ask you, but time does not permit it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the view of the kidnapping of girls, of course, as has been mentioned numerous times, there is an inequality before the law. And so the way that the matters are investigated sometimes depends on who is on the receiving end of the alleged criminal action. And so I think what we've seen is in times there have been forced conversions, there have been forced kidnappings. At those times, security forces have been reluctant to investigate, even if the outcome of the investigation is this was an intentional action or it was a personal choice, yet the investigation needs to be transparent, needs to be honest. And we haven't seen those. What we have seen is where calls have been made in particular cases that have been proven to be forced. They have been set aside because there have been a desire not to cause offense to particularly majority Muslim areas where that could cause trouble for the security forces. So they are, just as in the case where people were attacked in their homes and this deal was struck, sometimes similar things are done to ensure that there is some sort of equilibrium kept at the expense of the Christian community there, of course.